We had quite a big sample size, and we found out that very few of the skulls, uh, 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, have Native American haplogroups, which is ancestry. So that obviously tells us that they didn't originate here. They must have come from somewhere else. And when you study all the different haplogroups that show up in the results, you see the only place in the world where you get all of those haplogroups represented is around the Black Sea and Crimea. And the other largest elongated skulls in the world are found there. So that's those are two factors that create quite a probable link. So the questioning is, why would they leave? And it's very likely that they were chased out of their home territory, which is typical of Europe and Asia anyway. Over the course of time, you always have marauding armies coming in some locations like Israel over and over again.
Yeah.
And so displacement is the most logical reasoning behind it, but how and why they wound up in Paracas is the next question that I'm presently looking at now.
They have these, like it's a big trip, and I know you explained how they probably escaped through like the Red Sea and went out through the Polynesian islands and across like maybe even Easter Island, and the fact that they carry red hair, which is not found in Native Americans. I mean, not that I know of anyway. And I noticed that on some of those skulls in Paracas, and even some of I guess that's the Wari culture, a little bit more south of Paracas, that they have a lot of them have these giant jaws, or not giant, but larger than like Native American jaws. And I noticed that in Polynesia, a lot of the peoples have large jaws as well. Like there's one trait there, and I know you've mentioned this before. Some of them actually carry red hair out in the middle of nowhere, where you wouldn't think that gene would have carried over there, but there it is.
Yeah, well, the origin of red hair is actually in the area of Afghanistan and Iraq. Most people think of Ireland, but we're looking much farther back in time. So that's where genetically red-haired people came from. And it's true in all of the Polynesian cultures, whether it's the Maori in New Zealand or in Tahiti or in Hawaii, there are still people alive to this day who have genetically red hair. And that hair, those genetics predate any contact with Europeans. So that's another possible link as well. There used to be elongated headed people who lived in Easter Island and Tahiti and Hawaii. So again, it's an old bloodline that when the Tahitians arrived in Hawaii, for example, about 1400 AD, then anyone living there at that time would have, over the course of time, been absorbed into the new dominant culture. But I know people who live in Hawaii to this day who have genetically red hair. They call it ahu, which means red, and it's a genetic characteristic of an ancient people.
Yeah, and I've noticed that a lot with Middle Eastern people too, that there's very few groups, but there are several groups, and even in Northern Africa, like there's I forgot the name of them, but they are found to be indigenous African people, but they are white, and a lot of them have green and blue eyes, and even Rh negative blood. Some of them, actually a large amount of them. And I wanted to know maybe if the Paracas people had any connection to a lot of these mummies they find in Northern Africa that are redheaded as well, and like the pre-pharaonic people seem to have even they were fast. Like I've seen a lot of statues with the stone cut where they were depicting blue eyes in them. And then also like maybe Ramses that had red hair, and he's from like the Libya, Northern African area, I thought. Maybe I might be wrong about that, but he seemed to have had red hair too. So that seemed to be pretty common around like even Egypt at one time or another.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that's something that almost nobody knows about, because people think of, recently I've been watching some documentaries where they're recreating, the time of Tutankhamun and stuff like that. And all the actors are actually Arabs.
Yeah.
But the Pharaonic people, the descendants of the Pharaonic people are what today are called the Coptic Christians. And so they are the descendants of the dynastic people, because when the Romans conquered Egypt, they introduced Christianity. And so the people living there at the time were the descendants of the pharaohs. And so they adopted Christianity. And then in the 600s came the invasion from Arabia, and that's when the Muslim influence entered. So there's still about 8% of the population of Egypt who are the descendants of the dynastic people, and they have blue eyes and green eyes, and some have red hair, because I've met them.
I know I'm sidetracking off of the practice people, but I kind of think
That's
it's
okay.
all one story, kind of in my mind,
Sure.
at least
Sure.
for me paying attention. But I don't know if you've heard that they unearthed I think it's like, I think they said it was 15-foot sarcophagus stone, and it's that really hard stone like the other stuff that seems to be pre-pharaonic, and they opened it up. But I wanted to show you a picture. Okay, so this is if maybe I can get this bigger, I think. Yeah. This is supposed to be the 3 mummies they found in this sarcophagus, that what they say, it says in the article, were decomposing in sewer water. But I noticed that you can't see this skull right here. I mean, I noticed that these look kind of normal skulls, but this one has this weird small hole in the back of the skull that it immediately, and it kind of even looks a little more bulbous than these two. So I couldn't find any better pictures of the skeleton, because they said they were going to open it in a couple weeks, but I guess they got they wanted to hurry up and do it, so they hadn't opened it up, and this is what they found in there, which I thought was really odd. Like, that didn't go in there in the first place, maybe. But this skull that you can't really see here for some reason has a really small, I forgot what that thing's called in your neck. But this doesn't seem to be like these others, and I was kind of wondering, like, what your thoughts were on this. Let me back out of this picture thing here. And but anyway, I noticed this looks a lot like those bigger boxes that you have on this video, the stone boxes in Egypt. And it seems to be like the same people made that. But the thing they're saying is this thing had mortar on it, which, as far as I know, they didn't, these older, kind of more technologically advanced stone heavy boxes, they didn't have mortar, did they?
No. And like, this is a classic example of something that was made several thousand years ago and was then used probably during the time maybe of the Romans to bury people into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't think that this, because they're trying to say that this is pharaonic too, or it's a
No.
9 foot, excuse me. But yeah, I thought that was a kind of amazing. But I did notice that skull in there, and it immediately made me think of the Paracas skulls and how they're completely different from Homo sapiens. I mean, and I was also wanting you to get in maybe about, like, as far as how many different humans that weren't us were there at one time.
Well, that's the problem, is that we, Homo sapiens is very effective at taking over other people's land and wiping them out. So it's unknown how many others there were, but it has been stated by 3 doctors so far. Just the position of the foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters your skull, it's over 2.5 inches farther back than it's supposed to be in the Paracas skull. So that's not the result of head binding, that's genetics. Because of the size and shape of the skull, nature, or whatever you want to call it, evolution, caused that to be there in order to be able to balance the skull properly. So that by itself, these doctors have stated, make the Paracas at minimum a subspecies of human being. They're not Homo sapiens sapiens. There's something else capable of breeding with human beings. And that's where the whole thing about head binding began with the Paracases. As they mixed with normal looking people, the genetic characteristic of the Paracas started to disappear. So they started doing the head binding in order to maintain that design of skull. But again, this is something academics aren't looking at all.
Yeah.
So it's me.
Yeah, and I did notice that, like you said, you were talking about how it seemed to be like some of the skulls were maybe whoever the Paracas people were originally, and then later on, it seemed like you said, they were interbreeding with the locals, maybe the Nazca
Mhm.
or somebody. But I noticed those videos where you were talking about like most of the heads, or at least for the Paracas people, were found kind of in one spot, like a mass grave, almost like someone moved in and decided that no more of those people there.
Yeah. Well, there are four major royal cemeteries in the Paracas area, and that's only where the nobility were buried. The common people were buried just all over the place. They could be under the house right here. I don't know, but but that's the last of the royal cemeteries at a site called Camacho, and it's a very shallow tomb. All of the skulls show head trauma, like they were banged over the head. There between 50 and 100 of them in this mass grave. All the bones are broken. Uh, they were buried maybe about a foot deep, which is not traditional. Traditionally, they were buried 10, sometimes 20 feet underground. And so
Yeah.
that to me looks like a killing field. And the timing matches when the arrival of the Nazca people happened.
Yeah. So you think that was probably like you were talking about the classic Homo sapiens behavior, that it's done everywhere, where like, as soon as we get into Europe, Neanderthal disappears and maybe Devenison man disappears, and all these people or other humans disappear when we kind of show up there. But it seems like, I think what they say, that at least Asian, Native Americans and Europeans all have about 3 to 5% Neanderthal DNA, so they had to have interbred at least a little bit.
Right.
And
No,
it seems
exactly.
so. I know you recently got these skulls tested, and
Mhm.
you go ahead and tell us what the results are, because they're pretty mind blowing, even with the little bit that you get back. And I also wanted to ask you, like, do you feel like you're banging your head against the wall when you interact with supposed real scientists, archaeologists, where they just don't want to go down certain roads?
I honestly don't bother to anymore. Like there's no opposition to what I'm doing. They're just basically ignoring me, which is fine. Even the Peruvian archaeologist who was in charge of the DNA study, because we had to have a Peruvian archaeologist because we had to get permission from the government, so they insisted, and he did that, and he did write his report, but he just submitted it to the Ministry of Culture. It didn't go in any magazine or publication, or he didn't go on TV or anything with it. And I was kind of perplexed about that. And I went to see him about a month later, and I said, "What about these haplogroups that don't match Native American?" His answer was, "Well, that's very curious." He didn't want to get into a discussion. He didn't even want to talk about it. He said, "Well, yeah, it's kind of strange." And then I showed him some photos of some skulls from the area that he'd never seen before, because they're in obscure little museums, and they're very big skulls. They're much bigger than cranial deformation. And he just said, "Well, those are very strange. No interest in pursuing it. Like he's just a government man doing his job." So that's why I decided to make YouTube videos about the results, because I knew the academics wouldn't bother. And YouTube's a great way to send information out. So these are basically the results that we got of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, of 11 skulls. One of them is the haplogroup, which is the mitochondrial DNA, as in the mother's side. We weren't able to get anything from the father's sides, because that's nuclear DNA. It's very difficult to get. But we got U2E1, H1, HK, H1B1, and then only two of them were B, and so the Native Americans are supposed to be A, B, C, or D. That's it. Like that's it in terms of the haplogroups, and those are the people whose ancestors crossed over the Bering Land Bridge. So we only got 2 results that showed Native American DNA, and then another 5 results came out unknown. So the computer program was able to detect that it was mitochondrial DNA, but nothing known to science.
Yeah, so this wasn't something in their human database.
Yeah, exactly, because all human beings, all ethnic groups in the world have been DNA tested. You know, the whole genome has been done. So
Yeah.
these these show ancestry of some unknown hominid or humanoid or something.
Which is kind of strange because that leads you back to Europe or Eurasia at least. And it seems like, you know, you had at least in that area several different humans, and it kind of makes you think of, you know, like Lord of the Rings or something where there's all these different kinds of people. Like, you know, they obviously, if they came from that area, that's the same area that Neanderthal was in for a long time, and maybe even Devenison man way northern to them. So it could have been like a you know, like you said, just an unknown group of humans we haven't found, and they don't want to talk about it because it really messes up things, because that means there was somebody in recent Homo sapien times also running around the planet, sailing and building, and you know. So that is a really crazy idea. And I thought I heard you also talk about blood types that show that there were mixed
Oh yeah.
all over the world, like just regular. I believe Native Americans are mostly O, I think, or maybe that's backwards.
Yeah, from Mexico down to no, yeah, from Mexico down to the southern tip of South America, all people of 100% Native American um, ancestry are supposed to be blood type O, like 100%. When you get into North America, or you know, farther into North America, going north, then you have little bits of other blood types in, but the studies I've seen from Mexico all the way down to Patagonia is 100% blood type O. So this guy called Will Hart, who's an author, he sent me some data from an article that was published in a scientific journal in the 1970s. And right after it was published, the the authors were contacted and were told that that study was to be crushed, as in it was pulled out of all the records. So you're not able to track it down, but he was able to find it. And of 14 samples of Paracas blood that was tested, this was taken from, I think, cloth samples from the mummy bundle. Blood type A shows up 28.5%, blood type B 7.1%, blood type AB, which is the rarest in the world, it's only 3% of the population, 21.4%, and then blood type O is less than half. So
Yeah.
that shows you a lot of ethnic mixing going on somewhere.
Yeah, that's and the whole thing about that, where they just kind of show up in the area at the happens to be the biggest bay there, and I heard you say, I guess you're also a sailor. You like to sail too, so you kind of understand the whole ideas about the air currents and stuff going north and south down the coast. So it was kind of amazing to me that they landed there, and I wondered if there were people to the north of them, like where the Olmec heads and stuff were, and they knew not to go there, or possibly they knew about these ancient structures and ancient calendars and all that stuff that were close by. Maybe they already knew that stuff was there, and that's why they went there. Like, you know, Puma Punku and all that stuff. I don't know what the Russian's guy's name was, but once I heard that little story about how he was talking about how, or I guess it's Tiwanaku, not Puma Punku, that was a calendar that matched the time when the Earth's tilt was a little bit different, so it wasn't aligned the same way anymore, or something like that. And then I kind of wanted to get into who you thought build all these things that are out there, like this moon rock area that has this amazing, possibly solar and lunar calendar in the rocks they're cut, and some of these other places like I'll wait a minute and get into the Devil's Door there, because I had a thing I wanted to ask you about. But some of these other things that seem to be precision cut just in the rock out there in the middle of nowhere, and the Inca seem to have discovered them, just come upon them or whatever.
Yeah, well, what we find is we find different construction styles. So in the area around Cusco, which was the Inca capital, that's where the polygonal stonework is, where the stones fit perfectly together. And each stone is a different shape and size. Sometimes they're 4-sided, sometimes they're 12-sided, but they 3-dimensionally interlock with each other. And that's not something that we could do without a hell of a lot of effort today. Then Pumapunku and Tiwanaku are actually the same place. It's just that Tiwanaku is a much bigger location, but they're basically next door to each other. And the Tiwanaku people, 2,000 years ago, discovered the site in ruins, and then they built their ceremonial city there. It looks like Pumapunku was actually buried in mud, because it's just a hill, more or less. It's only been exposed on 3 sides. So I don't think the Tiwanaku people even knew that was there. And so that's where you have perfectly, like, this is not polygonal, this is perfectly straight lines. It's a very different technique. Incredible levels of precision. You can put a 2-foot metal level onto the surface and you can't see light. I mean, this is as flat can be. So that technique is very different. And then in Egypt, you have another completely different technique. Again, it's very linear, like what you find at Pumapunku, but we see lots of tool marks in Egypt. We see power saw marks and drill holes and all sorts of stuff with saws and drills cutting more efficiently than what we can do today. So you're looking at least 3 different construction techniques, and probably 3 different ancient cultures that had levels of high technology.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to get into that with the what you were talking about, the 3-dimensional interlocking pieces, and then also these other type buildings. It almost seems like they had computer 3D modeling or something, to that effect at the time, so they could run a machine that would cut it out like a router or a laser or whatever it was on some of these things in Egypt, and even some of the stuff in South America there looked like these were computer programs that knew exactly the mathematical way to carve it into the rock for whatever purpose they were using. I mean, I'm not saying they had computers.
Yeah, well,
I'm saying it seems like in today's world, we would have to 3D model it and then use high-tech tools to accomplish the same thing.
yeah, no, that's the case. Like in Egypt, it's more linear construction. So the stones more or less stack on top of each other, except the casing stone on the Great Pyramid is what's left of it is like hyper precise. You can't fit a human hair in the join. So that blows the idea that the dynastic people with bronze chisels did that work. But yeah, the polygonal stuff, every stone's a different shape and size, and there are no straight lines. So you have curves and counter curves that are matched by the corresponding curve and counter curve. You couldn't physically pull one of those stones out of the wall because it's locked into the other ones.
Yeah.
And so for us to do that, yeah, each stone would have to be done individually, and would have to have been done with something like a CNC machine controlled by a computer in order to match where it's supposed to fit. So yeah, the stuff in Peru is actually much more puzzling than the stuff in Egypt. Egypt is a question of incredible scale.
Yeah.
Like the Great Pyramid or the 100-ton boxes in the Serapeum, or even the 30-ton one that they found in Alexandria. There's, even when if it happened to be from Roman times, the Romans couldn't carve like black granite to that level of sophistication. So that by itself is telling you that the box itself is much, much older, was rediscovered, and then was repurposed for the burial of three people.
Yeah,
Uh,
it kind of seems like there was, like you said, different cultures, but they all had similar tools, or at
yeah,
least technology, and they just had different styles. Like when you look at the Osirian behind the pyramid there, that
oh,
just blows my mind. I'm thinking, like why haven't they dug it up? Why aren't we looking at the whole thing? And it's obvious there's a. Do you think those people are the people that made the other technologically advanced stuff in Egypt? The people that built the underground city there that's still there?
oh yeah, because there's a whole series of tunnels that I've been in the tunnel system. I've been 3 levels underground at Giza. Not that I was supposed to, but my friend Yusuf, who lives across the street, he knows all the guards, and so he can take an individual there. You can't go there with a giant group of people. But most of the construction in Egypt is underground, which most people don't know. The pyramids are are on the surface and they're huge, but there's a whole shaft and tunnel system under Giza, which is part of the ancient engineering that's there, and supposedly under Karnak and other sites as well. The great thing is that they're starting to open this stuff up, because with our group, we were allowed to go in an area off limits on the plateau where technically, tourists are not taken there, but if you get permission, then the guards go with you and you can go in behind and have a look, because the plateau is huge in scale.
Yeah.
And so there are shafts there. You can see them still. They're mostly filled with sand, but they're 14 feet by 14 feet in width, and go down presently about maybe 50 feet. But you can tell that over the course of thousands of years, sand has been collecting in them. And those are carved in the bedrock. They're huge. And as well as the Osiris shaft, which was never allowed to be visited by the public. We paid, I think they opened it up in November of, I think 2017, they opened it up to the public, but not the general public. You have to pay for a special license. So we paid something like $2,000 for 2 hours. And our group of 35 people got to go in. And it's a shaft system that goes down 200 feet into the bedrock. There are 3 levels. The second level has 2 boxes similar to the one that was found in Alexandria. And then in the bottom, underwater, there's one that's probably 80 tons. And we were, I was allowed in there to film. I got to film the whole thing. The guards didn't want to come in. They just sat outside and smoked cigarettes and drank tea, which is amazing. Like for Egypt, it was never like that before. It was always, armed guards and no photographs and no this or that. So Egypt has opened up a lot, and that's why it's exciting to go once a year, because we're going in April of next year, and I'm eager to see what's opened up now. All it takes is the right person with the right key to open up the metal door to let you go in and look
Yeah.
at the stuff that has been prohibited for more than 100 years.
Yeah, and it's amazing some of the stuff that you show on your channel that like you would never see that in National Geographics or stuff like that. They just don't go
Oh,
there. They stick with
never.
that same thing they've been telling me
No.
since I was a small child, that they just dragged ropes and built it, and it was the pharaonic people that built everything there, and they don't even want to get into some of the artifacts that they dig up themselves. I noticed that.
Yeah.
So the reason I was kind of asking if you think maybe there were, like several of these ancient pre-Diluvian civilizations with similar technologies, like all around the world, is because we know that there were contact, like the cocaine and the mummies and different, just little indications that there was a global civilization that interacted with each other, at least, or several of them. And I was wanting to know if you thought that maybe all of that was based on stone technology, because it seems like, all of these megalithic buildings, they have these weird notches, and obviously they seem to be able to manipulate stone. But not only that, you bring up a lot of the times when you go to these places that they have resonance, and like Christopher Dunn was talking about, how you could drop sulfuric acid and zinc oxide down the shafts, and it would the vibration of the Nile River underneath in the chamber would make a sonic resonance that would put off X-rays from the hydrogen that was coming out of it. And to me, that just made absolute technological sense, you know, like, but not only that, and this is kind of where I wanted to get to the Devil's Door, is that I noticed when you go up on Machu Picchu and you were showing the main attraction, the calendar there. And I was also going to ask you a question about I think the little facets all over it that seem to be like a separate calendar, because you were talking about in that video that each of the fields were facing a different way with just a little bit different light for different crops. And I was wondering if maybe that calendar also told people when to plant on each of those things, because it seems like a really complicated calendar up there. And that kind of gets into this stone technology. Like in Egypt, they always have the obelisk, and everything's always some kind of super hard quartz, mainly quartz, granite or diorite or something like that. In South America too. And when I look at that Devil's Door, it looks like something just parked up against the wall there. And maybe it was something like communication, like all the way through the stone. If they had power going through it, or they had some way of making piezoelectric power out of the spots they go. I also was thinking, I saw you in that amphitheater thing, and I think it was the Mari, that might be where it's at. But you were talking about how the sound, it seemed like some kind of sound engine, and it made me think that maybe some of those places are transmitters and other places are where you would receive messages through the crystal rock, or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at resonance now, and the reason why the precision fit isn't, you know, people will say that that's for earthquake proofing, but that's not the reason why they were made. They were basically earthquake proof, but the reason why you don't have mortar and you have very close contact from one stone to the next is so that you can set up a vibration or a resonance inside the structure. And that creates a different kind of energy inside the structure compared to outside. So that's why in Cusco, the megalithic stuff tends to be courtyards. And so the energy inside would be slightly different from the outside. And with the Great Pyramid, of which there are, you know, they're the three on Giza, but there are also two at Dashur, the Bent and the Red Pyramid. And then there's another two sites called Abu Sir and Abu Ghurab that had pyramids that are now destroyed, and another site called Abu Rawash where the whole thing looks like it was taken apart. So you had like probably 8 original pyramids that were built with incredible finesse, and then the dynastic people come by later and they try to copy them, but they don't do a very good job. They make them out of mud brick, or in the case of Saqqara, there's the Step Pyramid, which was probably a dynastic attempt to replicate the Great Pyramid. But the only way they could do it is to do it in a step fashion. They weren't able to do the engineering of perfect, you know, 52-degree angle, perfect sides. Also, I think that the Great Pyramids were collectors of energy, not necessarily electricity, but energy of some kind.
Yeah.
And that was transmitted to the receivers, which were the obelisks, because the obelisks could not have been made by the dynastic people either. Anything out of granite or basalt or cyanide or diorite was not something that the dynastic people could do, because the material is too hard. They worked, like, they did beautiful work in limestone and sandstone, but those they could manipulate with hardened bronze chisels. But with the harder stone, if you go to the Cairo Museum, you will see dynastic period, relatively small statues, like maybe 6 feet tall, that were done during dynastic times, but they don't have a polish to them. They're really rough, because that's the state of the art of the tools they had. They had hard stone pounders and bronze chisels, but then next to that, you'll see something which has a super high gloss to it, and that is a pre-dynastic sculpture, because the basic principle is your tool has to be harder than the material. So copper and bronze can't cut granite, So you need something at least on the level of carborundum or diamond. Granite contains quartz, which is 7 out of 10 hardness, and so you need something harder than 7. So you can't use sand to polish granite, because the sand's going to break down at the same pace that the granite breaks down. So you need something harder than that. And diamond technology is not something that was invented until the 19th century, used in the mining industry. So you're talking more than about 2,000 years after the dynastic Egyptians, not during.
Yeah.
So that's the basic principle. And in Peru, we may be looking at technology which is actually so foreign that we don't have that capability. Like to do the polygonal work, it's so complex. Material is so hard that the stone could have actually been altered in terms of its consistency. They may have had a technique to be able to make the stone temporarily go soft. So like squishing marshmallows together. That's why you get this random pattern. You don't get, you don't get straight lines. It's always curves, which makes things like 50 times more difficult to make.
Yeah, that's like another point that makes me think they had some kind of, like they understood the quality of quartz and the different rocks, because it seems like, with all those different surfaces vibrating together in a place that obviously they knew they had earthquakes. Because that's what, that the Devil's Door there, it really looks like, it reminds me of where you plug in an electric drill or something. And it almost makes me wonder if they had some kind of machine that could use an earthquake when they just backed up to that rock and just charge up whatever it was they were using. Or like, it seems like, the crystal part of the mountain was the most important part, even at Machu Picchu, with that thing that's literally, like you said, the peak of that mountain. It's not a block they put up there or anything.
Yeah. Well, also the standard story behind it's called the Intihuatana, which means the hitching post. And it's the most iconic thing in Peru, basically. But it has all of these different surfaces, and local experts tell me that it wasn't simply like a calendar that was used during solstice festivals. It was used to monitor the growing of the crops throughout the Inca world, because the Inca were incredible at keeping records of agricultural production. They had a system called quipus, which are knotted cords, which was an accounting system. And so by monitoring like May 14th, 1532 or something, they would have people recording in the production areas of agriculture how high, for example, the corn was on that day. And then that would be recorded, and then that would be compared with the year before, and then 10 years before. So they were looking at patterns and cycles of productivity, and that was the Inca's greatest feat, was agricultural production. They had enough food stored away to supply 15 million people for 4 years. And because they did that, then that meant they could afford to have people with extreme specialties like engineers and priests and soothsayers and all sorts of things. They had abundance of food, so they could afford to have a very sophisticated civilization in terms of pursuit of knowledge.
I noticed that the Inca, they built their own stuff there, but there was already the megalithic kind of steps already. So did they just move in and learn the farming technology from somebody else? Or did they already know about because it's amazing, the terraces and
oh yeah,
the way that you could tell that they had all kinds of stuff going on different levels of that or whatever, maybe even a different plan on each one, or so and then the way that everybody lives in the valley down there even today, it amazes me that they're not using, they didn't try to use that up into modern times for the same reason. I like, how did the technology
Yeah, they're actually
here?
starting. Yeah, yeah. Well, the key to the Inca is that they basically spent 1,000 years in Lake Titicaca on the island of the sun and the island of the moon, which are um, it's almost a Mediterranean climate, except at night it gets really cold. So the island of the sun, they terrace the whole thing, and it's like, I don't know how, it's at least 100 square miles in size. No, is it? No, it's at least 100 square miles in size, and they terrace the whole thing. So that's where they spent quite a bit of time experimenting with how to grow food, how to produce different types of food, because at the peak of the Inca world, they had 3,000 different varieties of potatoes. And so they were growing food from the valley floor to the tops of mountains, and each one is a microclimate. So that was their key success. And like at least 300 kinds of corn and all sorts of different things. So they spent about 1,000 years on the island of the sun, which is, you know, quite harsh. And by the time they entered Cusco in the Sacred Valley is springtime year round, and so it's very productive. So that gave them more than 500 years to be able to do more experimentation with how to grow food. And that's what as they expanded their world, that's what they used as a bargaining chip. They didn't use military that much to expand. They used trade and commerce and diplomacy. And so they were able to give to the people who they expanded into uh, types of seeds that those people had never heard of, and so that helped them to also be much more productive and wealthy.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole, it amazes me though that there's so much civilization based right around those mountains and that coast right there.
Mhm.
It's like, and obviously, or not obviously, but it seems like there was another ancient culture kind of in Central America and in southern Mexico. Maybe I was kind of wanting you to break down the kind of the timelines of the people, like who came first, and who were the people before, like the Inca and the Mayan and all of that. Because I mean, they teach that nowadays is basically what they focus on is Aztec, Inca, and Mayan is it's the ancient civilizations, and I rarely hear them talk about any of the other ones that came before them.
Mhm. Well, probably the oldest civilization in Central America and Mexico and Central America is the Olmec, this very obscure people who supposedly made these giant basalt heads, but that hasn't been proven. Most of the heads were found buried underground, you know, for a start. And so they were the earliest culture, somewhere around 1,000 BC. And then later on came the Maya, and I think the Maya more or less collapsed around 900 AD. And then the Aztec moved in from some land to the north, and they found what we call Mexico City. It was actually a number of islands in the middle of a lake called Texcoco, and they built their civilization there. They kept expanding and expanding the island, and now, of course, there basically is no lake left. There's a little bit that you can see traces of, but Mexico City is the whole city is built on a lake, which is really dangerous. So they build these skyscrapers with very little foundation, and
Wow.
the highways even go like this now because of the number of cars going on them. The
Wow.
surface underneath is not that stable, and then anytime they have an earthquake, then it wreaks havoc because again, Mexico is not on a stone foundation. So those are the Olmec, the Maya, the Aztec, and then also the Toltec are the four major civilizations that existed in Egypt, with the Aztec being the last one, destroyed by the Spanish under Cortez about 30 years before the Inca were destroyed.
And there's a lot of megalithic stuff that seems to be at the bottom of those pyramids too, because I know you mentioned a lot, and I do some shows with another channel, and we talk about a lot how it seems like no matter what, when a new culture comes, they always go put their their new religion on top of the old religion to make sure that that stays a spot that people pay attention to. You know, like the Catholics showed up and then they put their churches all over the place. But it seems like they were doing that already. Like the Aztec came and built on some Mayan stuff, and the Mayans came and built on something before them. And that there's like little chunks of kind of proofs at the bottom or under all of these things that there's all this megalithic stuff that just doesn't match the rubble, you know, mortar and block system that seems to have come after it everywhere, like even with the Inca.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because when the Spanish entered and took over Mexico City, then they took the temples apart and used the stones to build their to build their churches, which did two things, or probably three things. One thing is it was a way to destroy the old culture because the sacred sites were being taken apart, and then also they didn't have to go quarry their own stone. And also that's how you change the culture. It's like, this is the new belief system. In the case of the Spanish in Cusco, what they did is they built the churches right on top of the temples. They would take the temples apart and then rebuild them exactly in the same place. Whereas the Spanish didn't do that in Mexico City. They took them apart, and then a block away they would build the church in general. And that also happened in Europe, like with the cathedrals were built on older sacred sites, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, no one's really been looking at the megalithic elements in Mexico, as far as I can tell. And I noticed when we went to Palenque that there were these huge slabs of basalt sitting there, and then everything else is made kind of out of rubble. And so that didn't fit. And so when we went back, I saw more of that. Especially there's this obscure little place called Mitla, which is in the Oaxaca district of Mexico. And that place blew me away, because there you have, again, kind of volcanic rubble with volcanic ash as concrete used to build stuff. And then the beams on top, there are at least 10 beams that weigh 6 tons each. And then there's one that weighs 10 tons and one that weighs 18 tons. And it's like night and day comparing the construction technique. So obviously the native people who built Mitla found these megalithic blocks sitting there from someone else and just said, well, let's use these and put them on top. So that's what you see.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you know, I wanted to move back to Pumapunku for a minute.
Sure.
That seems like, well, kind of like the Osirian there, just something that just seems so far out of time and everything, that the technology there and just the way that everything's routed and cut straight and has different shapes in it. And the way it's just sitting there, like you said, it's on mud. And I've seen the little pillars of mud that still have like megalithic block just sitting on it, and it's got mud underneath it. That shows, you know, like obviously either the lake flooded or there was massive amounts of storms or something that flooded the whole area. But I also saw where you've been to several places in Peru where it seems like there's some kind of melting. And then also in Egypt, like, and I think you were saying it was like some kind of maybe plasma in a solar storm or something that maybe even triggered the Great Flood.
Yeah, I think it was all part of this ancient cataclysm of 12,000 years ago. And that's been corroborated by Dr. Robert Schoch, who's a geologist. He's the main one who's been looking at plasma ejection from the sun being something that ended the last ice age, like very rapidly. So at certain locations like Karnak and this very strange place that I just made a video of recently called Tanis in the Nile Delta, like huge megalithic works where everything has been, like everything's damaged. It's not damage caused by an army coming in, you know, hitting stuff with hammers or something. The surfaces are burnt off, and different stones react to heat in different ways. Like the alabaster remnants that we find at Karnak, the surface is blown, like is literally blown off, because that's what happens to alabaster when you rapidly heat it. With the granite, it's like the surface is peeled off because of the granular nature of granite. And then and also there are examples there where the crystal structure inside is bigger than the outside, so it's been reheated and partially melted. That takes at least 2,000 degrees Celsius to do. So that's not a local fire. That's something that came from somewhere else. And all the damage has come from the east, off by about 23 degrees. So the whole core of Karnak's one of the biggest temples in the world, but the core of it is all hard stone. It's all granite and basalt and stuff like that. And then everything else is sandstone and limestone. So most of it was done by dynastic people, but they built around this pre-dynastic core where every surface shows damage, especially on the eastern side. The western side, almost nothing. And then the north-south side, some. But it's like a force came and struck from that direction and just, wreaked havoc, snapped some 40-foot obelisks into several pieces, and tore the surface off of other ones. There's one that's still standing, which is amazing because of this force. And it's the lower 60 feet that's damaged. The upper probably 50 plus feet shows no damage at all. So it's something that came in very low to the ground and struck this location. And that kind of heat, if there was anyone living there at the time or plant life, it would have been vaporized, not just burnt, but vaporized, and the soil would have been completely destroyed, like would have become devoid of minerals. So if you look at my video about Tanis, you'll see that it's in the middle of a beautiful agricultural fields, but Tanis is this hill, and the soil is the consistency of flour. Like if you walk on it, it's like you're walking on the moon. So something very strange happened there.
Well, and that when I heard that, it kind of made me think of like in Zachariah Sitchin's books where he talks about, they had the pyramid wars and possibly nuclear weapons back then. Because I got kind of excited when I saw your video where you were showing the burn marks in Peru on some of the back or the sidewall or whatever, and I was thinking, that looks like energy weapons. But like you're saying, whatever happened came from pretty much the same direction. So it couldn't have been like different things. Most likely the same event that happened, because that's pretty amazing. So I didn't want to take up all your time, but I do appreciate you coming on my show. And in closing, was there? I was going to show your website and your YouTube page on here. I'll share the screen with you. But in closing, is there anything you would like to tell the audience? I know you have upcoming events and tours all over the world constantly, which is amazing. And I thank you for sharing it to the world on YouTube, which, like you said, that's a great platform when they don't censor you or turn it off. And I'm glad that nobody's too worried about what you're doing, because you're getting to put out a lot of information before maybe they decide they don't want people to hear it.
Well, I think honestly what's happening though is that there's simply, like, there used to be a lot of battling going on. Like Graham Hancock was attacked for more than 10 years for the work he was doing, but the academics don't really do that much anymore. They, I think they're just happy to do what they want to do, which is their own field of expertise. And so with tools such as YouTube, it's a great way to transmit information to the world in general. So gone are the days of bothering to submit information to academics and say, do you want to look at this and maybe publish something? It's better just to go directly to the public. And the reason why we do our tours is in order to learn more. So every time I go to Egypt, I've been 6 times so far. The next time will be April of next year. The cameras are rolling, and we get to pick up more information to share with people. And it gives it gives some insight to people who want to explore places like Egypt. So rather than going there with the idea that everything was made by the dynastic Egyptians, the history is much more fascinating because it goes much farther back in time than what we've learned. And that makes it much more interesting to visit these places, because the history is far more complicated than what we were taught in school. And we're starting to learn a logic as to what was going on. So that's the important thing, is trying to figure out how the stuff was done. It's a gradual process, but it's working.
That's awesome. And you have a bunch of books on Amazon. I picked this one kind of because I like the Paracas elongated skull things. It's like one of the really things that boggles my mind on who were these people, and like where'd they come from, why'd they show up there? Because it seems like not a coincidence to me that they would go to that area if they came from Europe. And in closing, on one last question I remembered, or actually two, has there ever been any of the Wari or the Paracas elongated head people that had beards? Like some of these ancient gods like Viracocha and whatever, they always depict them with a beard, which isn't normal for the area.
No, that's a good point. That's why that's another good reason for me to live here in Paracas, because I'm quite close to where the ancient cemeteries are. And so once in a while, a new artifact will show up that I get to inspect. So far, I haven't seen a mummy with a beard, but I'm hoping to get the Lima Museum warehouse, where they have 10,000 Peruvian skulls and probably hundreds of Paracas ones. So if there's a mummified one, that'll tell us whether they had facial hair or not, because that's not a Native American characteristic. So
Yeah,
that's,
be awesome.
Yeah, well, that's, the process is ongoing. I'm in no way done. I'm going to do more DNA testing. It's just now I'm going to do it myself. I don't have to bother to go through the government anymore, because they frankly don't really care. If something is in a private collection, then they're not interested in getting involved. And I said, well, would it be okay if I sampled them and had them tested? And they said, well, that's out of our jurisdiction, so we don't care.
Awesome.
which means yes, go ahead, basically. So that's what I'm going to do. It's the price of DNA testing keeps going down. It's down more than 90% than it was 6 years ago.
Wow.
And the machines are getting far more complex in terms of what they can study. So yeah, I've got some candidates coming up to be able to do that. The question is, will I do something like a GoFundMe campaign or what? I'm not quite sure yet, but I'm going to keep going with this till I'm spiral off the mortal coil here and go somewhere, go to the next realm of existence, I guess.
Right. And the other last question, I promise. Has there been any other Sumerian links, kind of like that bowl found in Bolivia? Or is that the only one? And see, because
that one's kind of questionable.
I think that maybe someone created it recently.
It's really hard to tell, because we do see Tiwanaku figures carved onto it as well. So either it's something that came from Sumeria and then other carving was added to it, which could be. But some artifacts have been found in Ecuador near this cave called Tayos, which is in the jungle, and they really look Sumerian. They're supposedly in the museum, a major museum in Ecuador. I just saw a video about that yesterday. I had no idea. They have 5,000 artifacts that were taken from this collection. Some of the metals look like they're very complicated alloys, so not something that would be native to Ecuador. But those could be artifacts that came from somewhere like Sumeria, because a lot of the iconography looks Sumerian to me, and there's no reason why the original person who had them, this guy called Father Crespi, who was a Catholic priest, there's no reason why he would have had them fabricated, because he lived in a little village in the jungle, why would he go to the expense of having something like that made up to be stored in some warehouse behind his church? It doesn't make sense. So that's something I may be part of a documentary coming up, going to Ecuador to study that stuff. So that'll be interesting if it happens.
All right. And like I said, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk to you for a minute. You're kind of, it's hard in today's world to have a conversation with someone about any real topic these days. I mean, not to say that we've been dumbed down, but it seems like we've been dumbed down, and I'm glad there's people like you out there that are still researching stuff so that we don't pass through another generation where things just get further forgotten. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, people are distracted by stuff now so much that it's understandable that they can't think properly. So yeah, that's why, you know, I chose to live here because my wife is Peruvian, and because very few people are looking at what I'm looking at, and I get pretty free access to look at what I want. So I feel very, well, I'm very grateful for it. And it's every day is just another adventure in this ongoing unraveling of what the hell was going on prior to the time that there was supposed to be civilization, when we obviously see examples of lost ancient high technology in different places.
Yeah. And then the whole concept that the caveman just kind of walked off of the Pleistocene and started building, you know, these complicated things, and then after that they forgot how, and then everything gets crummy for a long time, and it never made sense to me. And I am glad that you know, people like you are out there pointing out some of the just common sense things when you walk up and look at some of these things, that the story doesn't match the evidence on the ground. And I really want to thank you for coming on my channel, but I'll go ahead and let you go, because I'll talk you to oblivion with, like I said, 1,000,001 questions. And I'm going to go
Well,
ahead.
why don't you contact me?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, why not contact me in 6 months and we can do it again?
That sounds wonderful. I would love to have you on again. And maybe next time I'll try to keep it more to a single subject than all over the place.
It doesn't matter. It's great. Fine with me.